Hey there Dev Squad, Manuel here. In this part of the tutorial we are going to talk about unwrapping. Unwrapping is a process that is necessary for every asset that's going to go into a game engine. This will help us not only to define where certain parts of our textures are going to go, but will also help us to have a texture, because otherwise every color is going to look all jumbled and it's going to be all over the place. So let's get started. Okay, so just as before, I'm going to show you a little bit of certain concepts that you need to take into account before you go into unwrapping. This will make things easier for you once we go into the 3D program. So I'm actually going to show you another coordinate map just like the one we did before. So if you remember, the 2D coordinate map that we had before was X and Y. This is the same coordinate that you will see in every math class. And for unwrapping, we also have a coordinate system. So for 3D we have X, Y, and Z. And for unwrapping we also need a coordinate system. The only difference is they run out of letters, so we're not going to use X, Y, and Z. They use U, V, W. That's why we call the maps that we use for textures, we call them UVs, because it references the coordinate system. So it goes something like this. We draw our system first, and U is going to be the horizontal portion, and V, it serves as a mnemonic for the vertical portion. So U means horizontal and V means everything that goes into the vertical position, and this it's going to come into play later on when we go into the 3D program. The W portion is supposed to mimic the 3D part, and this is something that we really are not going to use much unless you're doing something very specific and very defined. I just wanted to put it out there just in case you're using something like 3D Studio Max or any other software that says UVW. It's referring to what we're going to do right now, but we pretty much are going to use these two coordinates, U and V. The second concept that I want you guys to know is that whenever we're dealing with textures, or at least the basics of texturing, we only have one particular space. So when we get into the 3D program, you're going to see that we have a defined space, which I will be referring to as the 0 to 1 space, because it's one full tile that goes from 0 to 1 on the U and from 0 to 1 on the V. And this is where we're going to place our textures. There's something else called UDIM tiling, which is a little bit more advanced. We're not going to talk about that in this tutorial, but just know that that exists. For now, every texture that you make needs to be confined to the 0 to 1 space, because otherwise when you go into your texturing program, so let's say you're painting your UVs here in Photoshop, if you go outside of the 0 to 1 space, then whatever you paint here or here, it's not going to be shown. So let's say you have a UV over here outside of the 0 to 1 space, whatever you paint here, it's not going to be painted on this piece, and this piece is going to be getting all kinds of different colors, because again, the 0 to 1 space, it's a tileable space that we can see later on in further tutorials that go a little bit more advanced into that. But for now, just know that every texture that you want to make should be inside of this 0 to 1 space, and that's why we need to utilize this space to the best of our abilities and try not to leave any space empty, because that's just pixels that we are wasting. Another thing that you should know, even though this space is going to look very small in the beginning, you're gonna say like, why are they giving us this space that's so crammed up? The reason is you can scale the pixels on this space as much as you want. So that's why you'll see textures that go from 64 to 8K. So imagine that something that's 64 is an extremely low resolution. It's going to be super pixelated all the way to 8K, which is a very high definition, almost movie quality like. So you can cram any type of resolution that's in here. And talking about resolution, the kind of resolution that we should be using for this, it has to be a squared resolution. What I mean by that is, if your texture is, if you decide that you want your texture to have a resolution of 128, then it needs to be 128 by 128 in order to function with this space. There are other ways to texture, and some studios have their own very special way of doing this, and sometimes it's not necessarily squared, but for the purposes of this tutorial, to make it a little bit easier for you guys to understand the basic concepts, we are going to keep our resolutions to square. So we're going to be having something like, if I say 1K, it'll be 1024 by 1024, or 2K would be multiplying this by the power of 2, and it will be 2048 by 2048. And that is how you should be scaling your resolutions whenever we're dealing with this. Different types of resolution, like if you were going to have here 1024 by 2048, that's something very specific that unless you have certain requirements for your project, would not be useful. So I would suggest to keep to the square part of the resolutions. Now let's jump to our 3D program. Alright, here we are in our 3D program, and we no longer need this box, so I'm just going to get rid of that. And fortunately, we still have this on pieces, and later on I'm going to show you something very fun with symmetry that we can do here. But let's start with the base, which is the easiest one to do. Okay, this will serve as an introduction to the basic of modeling here in Max. And what we're going to do is add an unwrap modifier. If you don't have the button here, all you have to do is go to modifier list and type U, so you can get unwrap UVW. This will be the modifier that we'll be using. But before we add that, make sure that you are not in subobject mode. What I mean by subobject mode is any of these selections here. So if you're in subobject mode and you have this polygon selected and you add this modifier, then what you're going to do is you're going to only unwrap this polygon. And this may lead you to some confusion and some freaking out, because sometimes when you open this, you're going to say like, where is the rest of my geometry? So make sure that before you add the UV unwrap modifier, that you are out of subobject mode. So if you are here in the polygon, just click on editable polygon. You should be out of subobject mode. Now you can add your modifier. I'm going to use the list so you can follow along. So I go to the U, and as you can see, it says UVW, just like I explained in the beginning. There you go. And I'm going to turn on edge faces so I can see my polygon. So that'll be F4 if you're in 3D Studio Max. And let's get started. So right here we have a panel of various different tools, various different ways to unwrap. There isn't one way to unwrap, and actually unwrapping depends a lot on what kind of assets you have. Is it a hard surface asset? Is it an organic? Is it a character? Is it a prop? There are certain basic rules that you can follow that I'm going to show you in this tutorial, but ultimately it will all depend on what kind of asset you're making. So there's a ton of tools here that I don't use. I'm actually going to show you the basic tools, and the other reason why I'm not going to show you every single tool is because I want you guys to be able to use this knowledge on every program that you use. So the basic tools that I'm going to show you here are also applicable in Maya if you're using that software. Now, one thing that we need to open is the UV editor. So if you click here, you're gonna see that we have our geometry here, and we have a 0 to 1 space. This is why I call it 0 to 1 space, and this is the only space where our texture should be. Anything outside our textures would not be correctly painted, so everything needs to be inside here. Alright, And sometimes you'll find something like this where you can see your geometry. Sometimes you'll find that there is nothing. So you may have that error that I had in the beginning, or it may be that because you've done an extensive modeling on your asset, then it's all jumbled into one point, and that happens a lot. So you'll just have to select it and unwrap it. But let's take a look at the various parts of unwrapping that we can use. So unwrapping is just translating a 3D object into a 2D space. And the reason why we're doing that is because so far, up until the day of recording this tutorial, the game engines need a 2D projection in order to recognize and get the textures for every model that you will see in your game. So in order for us to have that 2D projection onto our model, we need to tell the program where are the coordinates for the 2D projection of this 3D object. And the way that it works is, if you've had those toys where it comes in a carton box and you'll just have to assemble, it's kind of like a reverse process. You pretty much have to disassemble the toy and turn it into a 2D plane. Another good example for this would be those boxes that you'll get in like shipping places or Amazon. You usually see that they have seams where they just tape them up together and made it into a box. So we'll be doing the reverse of that. We'll be taking that box and we'll be turning it into a 2D form. So what we're going to use, and this is a very common tool that I always use when I'm starting to unwrap, is I always go by polygon. I rarely go by edge or by vertice. Sometimes I use edge for one of the tools that I'm going to show you next, but I more than likely will be using polygons for everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select these triangles down here. I'm going to use this, which is grow my selection. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this tool right here, which is called Quick Planar Map. And what does it do? What it does is it squashes whatever selection that you have made. So let's say if I select the whole thing, I'm actually going to uncheck this ignore back facing. Let's say I select my whole model, and let's say I'm looking at my model from the top. Right here you can see, and let's say I click this button. You're gonna see that my model is pretty much squashed from top to bottom, and this is going to produce some terrible unwrapping. So this is why sometimes we need to manually define where are we going to be unwrapping. Alright, so this tool, what it does is pretty much squashes the model on any direction that you see the projection. That being said, that's a very useful tool for when we have planar surfaces. So I'm just going to grow my surface here, and as you can see, we have pretty much one flat surface over here. So if we press Quick Planar, it's going to give us exactly what we're looking at. So this is a great tool for flat surfaces. So after I've done that, I'm actually going to put this away, and you have a huge, pretty much an infinite canvas to put things outside of the 0 to 1 space. This is what I do once I am wrapping. Once you're done unwrapping, you'll see me putting everything in the 0 to 1 space. But in the meantime, I'll just throw everything outside to not confuse it with things that I have not yet unwrapped. I'm going to grow my selection. Let's just grow it one more time. And we do planar. Okay? I'm going to put that over here. Now, for the rest of our mesh, we have this cylinder. And sometimes when you have elements or type of geometry that follows certain primitives, so the base is pretty much derived of one cylinder, it's just a cylinder with minimal variations, you'll see that in your UV editor, it's pretty much unwrapped, and it's not 100%, but it's getting pretty close of what we're gonna do. So right now it's actually, it kind of did a good job. It didn't do the best of jobs. However, I'm not going to use this because I want to show you how to do things. So what we're going to do is I'm going to put that aside, and I'm just going to do a selection here, make sure there's nothing there. And what we're going to do is we are going to go up, and so you can see there are display map scenes. We're going to turn that off so these green edges go away. And the reason why I did that is because those edges are very distracting for what we're going to do right now. What we're going to do right now is we are going to create our own seams. So imagine that this base is made out of cardboard, and I want to flatten this up. Let's say I want to store this in an easier way because this is taking up too much volume. So what I need to do, if this was cardboard, I would take my scissors or my X-Acto knife and I would cut a seam around certain places, so I can just open and unfold this and just make it into a 2D form, pretty much a rectangle, if you will. We're going to do just that, only we're not going to use any sharp objects. We are going to use the point-to-point seam tool. It's right here. So let's say we want the seam to be over here. So I'm going to click this, and the good thing about this tool is that it follows exactly the same loop. So this is another reason why I like to have quads whenever possible. You can have triangles, but if you have n-gons, then it will be hard for the tool to just follow the loop, and it'll make your life harder later on. So this is one of the reasons why we always want to keep the quads. Alright, so I'm going to go all the way down here, and I pretty much created my seam over there. Now what's going to do is we're going to cut this thing in half, and because we've already imagined that we don't have these caps anymore. Now what we're going to do is just cut this and unfold it. Alright, so what I'm going to do is go here, and I'm going to right click to get out of this tool, click on one polygon, and the way that I like to quickly select everything is by using this expand polygon selection to seam. So if I click here, it's going to select everything, even the parts that are already unwrapped. And the reason is because we didn't create any particular seams for the top or the bottom. So if I were to just go into edge mode, and this is another way to create your own seams that may be a little bit faster than using the point-to-point seam tool, would be to just double click to select your edge, because this pretty much works like modeling. So double click would select your whole loop, and what we'll be doing here is let's say not here, let's do it here. We'll use this button here that says convert edge to seams, convert edge selections to seams. Right now it's getting a little bit off screen, but that's what it says, convert edge selection to seam. And I'm going to click on it, and as you can see, that turned blue, and now we have a seam over there. So let me just show you real quick how this is going to look. And I think I missed the seam over here. I'm just going to create it. And by the way, if you made a mistake and you grabbed an edge that you didn't want, you can hold the key of Alt and click on that edge. And it will completely delete that edge. So right now I'm just going to add that back. And I just wanted to show you how this works. So if you have created your seams, then you can just select one polygon and expand polygon selection to seams. And as you can see, it respected those seams and it didn't select this part. Okay, right now it's not really necessary because we already unwrapped the bottom, and what we can do is just go here and deselect this one from the editor itself. And now what we can do is just, because those seams are already created for us, we can do quick planar. And even though this is going to give us a terrible squashed UVs, the thing that I would always do next is use this tool right here, which is named quick peel. Quick peel, if you're using Maya, is called unfold, and it pretty much does that. It peels off the mesh from the seams that you've already done, and if we're following the example of the cardboard box, it will turn this, it will cut this out, and it will turn it into a 2D plane. So let's click here, and as you can see, it turned it into a 2D surface. All right, and sometimes it will just be like this oblique. One thing that you'll see me do in this tutorial is I don't like having oblique assets because this can occupy more space than what we really needed to occupy. So usually I like to keep my things vertical or horizontal. The other reason why I like to keep them either vertical or horizontal is because if I'm projecting a specific texture, so let's say if I want to put like a sticker or a decal on it, it's going to be easier if it has a vertical or horizontal orientation than if it is just oblique. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to turn it around, and if you have angle snap, which if you click here, this is angle snap, it's going to snap by angles of 5 degrees. That's the default solution. Or if you prefer to do it manually, you can just turn that off and try to use your eyes a little bit compared to the checker map that we have behind us. Alright, Dev Squad, that's the end of this video. In the next video, I'm going to be continuing unwrapping the base, and you'll see the whole process of me just going through the whole object as you're seeing here. Stay creative, and I'll see you in the next video.
This video was made possible by my supporters on Patreon. If you want more videos like this, check out my Patreon page using the link in the description. To stay up to date on new releases, make sure you follow us on social media.